being an entrepreneur is a 24/7 job. And when you're hiring, you need a partner that works as hard as you do. That hiring partner is LinkedIn Jobs. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. For one thing, you could post a job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people. You get qualified candidates. At the end of the day, the most important thing to your business is the quality of the candidates. And with LinkedIn, of course, you can feel confident that you're getting the best. Based on LinkedIn data, 72% of small and medium businesses say using LinkedIn helps them find high quality candidates. Find out why more than 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring today. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Altucher. That's linkedin.com/Altucher to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
What does it take to make a moonshot kind of discovery? A discovery or invention or advance in science that's going to change the entire world. So for instance, obviously landing on the moon was such a moonshot. So many technologies were developed along the way to finally put a man on the moon. And similarly, my guest today has worked on everything from basically the invention and widespread development of self-driving cars. He's worked on the latest innovations that created all this AI that we're seeing right now in our lives. He worked on augmented reality, in particular with Google Glass, and so many other, like one thing we talked about quantum computing. We talked about drones that will drop off your groceries right on your backyard. So many things. My guest is Astro Teller. He is the founder at Google of their Moonshots laboratory. It was originally Google X, and now it's simply called X. And when you hear some of the inventions and discoveries that have spun out of his lab, I guess he's worked at Google for about 15 years, and now he has a podcast. I highly encourage everybody to listen to his podcast. You can listen to it on Spotify or anywhere else you listen to podcasts, but it's called the Moonshot Podcast, and it's with Astro Teller. I first met Astro back in, I think, 2012, 2013. I actually visited him. Well, first off, we went to the same grad school for computer science at Carnegie Mellon University, and we went around the same time, actually, but I didn't know him there. And then I first met him at Google X when I visited out in San Francisco in around 2012 or 2013. And then he was on my podcast in 2015. And now, 10 years later, he's on the podcast again, talking about his podcast and the latest projects that are moonshots. And it's so interesting, not only learning what the future has in store for us by seeing what these moonshots are, but what is the mindset, the psychology of a moonshot, of developing and believing that you can develop something that almost seems like science fiction. So we talk about all of this and more. Here's Astro Teller. Astro Teller from X's Moonshot Laboratory. Did I describe it right?
Yeah, X is Alphabet's Moonshot Factory.
What does that mean? Like, does anybody say, Astro, what are you up to today? Like, do you report to anybody over at Alphabet?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I lightly report to Sundar and to a man named Hiroshi, but X largely left to its own devices. We have a process, we run that process, and the most important kind of check-in that I have with Alphabet is not in the early days when we're starting things, but in the later days where something is relatively mature and the question becomes, what should we do with this thing? That's when Alphabet gets more involved.
And this all started, I remember I visited you in your lab something like 12 years ago. This all started back, I think Sergey Brin initially said, hey, let's do this Moonshot Laboratory, and you were brought on to run it. if I remember correctly?
Yeah, the founders of Google, Larry and Sergey, asked me and a man named Sebastian Thrun to co-found and then run this kind of 21st century Bell Labs that they imagined that they could set up right now. Google was originally called Google X, with this mission to take moonshots, to go find problems to solve outside of Google's kind of core business areas, and then hopefully to find solutions to those problems as well.
And of course, more recently, you've started a podcast, Moonshots, the Moonshots Podcast, about some of these moonshots that you've been and your team have been uncovering. But what are some of the, let's say just over the past decade, what are some of the moonshots that you think have most surprised you, have most impressed you?
Yeah, I'll give you a few, but as you just pointed out, if someone just looks up Moonshot Factory, Moonshot Podcast, they can get a lot more of the kind of detail I'll give you some summaries of here. But here's 3 examples. The first one is Google Brain. So the modern explosion of machine learning, to a non-trivial extent, started here at X about 14 years ago, where we were the first ones to really industrialize what you can now think of as deep learning or foundation models. And that, after a few years, was going so well that we actually moved it from X back into the main part of Google. Another one that many of your listeners might be familiar with is the self-driving cars. They were called something different while they were at X, but they're now known as Waymo, and they are giving rides to people in a range of cities around the United States already with nobody in the front seat. And they're doing so incredibly safely, and that we're really proud of that moonshot for having gotten all the way from that's crazy 15 years ago to, oh, wow, that's the future, and it's here today, and I can just experience it. In San Francisco, in Phoenix, in Austin, in Los Angeles, and a bunch of other cities coming soon. Here's a third example, the drones for package delivery. Many of your listeners may not be as familiar with that as they are with the self-driving cars, but I'm telling you that it's going as well, and 3-4 years from now, people will be experiencing packages that just fly to them through the air at least as much as they are getting a ride in a self-driving car. I'm really excited how that's going.
Let me dive into 1 or 2 of those for a second, and then we can get to more recent ones. But like the self-driving cars, so I feel like all the pieces were there. Computer vision existed. Yeah, that was just statistical matching, basically advanced statistical matching, that existed. Obviously, car technology existed. Was it a matter of just kind of packaging together all these technologies into a way that was safe? Or what was the moonshot? What was the innovation that you felt really catapulted this up?
You know, I don't describe it this way very often, but one of the ways I think you could describe what we do is we are not in the business of paradigm shifting science. We're in the business here at the Moonshot Factory of paradigm shifting engineering, and usually in the business specifically of paradigm shifting systems engineering. So we take a bunch of things, each of which is individually already somewhat known and understood, and we push them together in a surprising way that allows for an outcome that is very surprising, even though none of the component parts were unknown. What you just described about the self-driving cars is LiDAR existed, radar existed, cameras existed, computers existed, cars existed. And yet, when we said 15 years ago that it was as wrong for cars to be driven by humans as for elevators to be driven by humans, I guarantee you that was not taken at all seriously by anybody outside of Alphabet. Now, 15 years later, Waymo has already announced that quite a while ago now, they're giving more than 250,000 rides per week to people who don't work at Alphabet for money with nobody in the front seat of the car. The car's just driving itself. So we've gone from no way to it's just a normal course of your day in 15 years. And the difference, all of that work, was about the systems engineering. How do you make it so incredibly safe, so intuitive to use that people would just get into a car that has no one in the front seat and let it take them somewhere?
It's interesting because when you first hear about it, it does sound like science fiction. Like this was what the Jetsons were doing, although they were flying around more. You could picture 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people thinking, oh, that's science fiction. It's never going to happen. And you're right. If you just sit down and think about it, though, okay, you have a car, you can put a radar on it, you can have the radar, and a camera attached to a computer that's doing vision recognition and estimating how far away different objects are. The computer could know the rules of driving. And then it's kind of just... there's a mindset. You have to believe this is all possible and that you could put this all together, and that by looking at it in this sort of piecemeal way, it might even be an easy problem, not as hard as people think. Would you say that's kind of a summary of the mindset, or how would you describe the mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I would say...
I'm not saying it's easy in a trivial way, just that it's possible. It's in the realm of the possible.
Exactly. A lot of moonshot thinking is about being able to say what if or why not. To be able to say, humans can do this, so that seems like an existence proof. We have all these pieces. Even if it feels like science fiction, let's just try and see. And it turns out, for example, with self-driving cars, getting it to do the right thing under kind of idealized circumstances for a couple miles is pretty easy. It's just every time you okay, let's see it work for 10 miles. Let's see it work for 100 miles. Let's see it work for 1,000 miles. Remember, you can't responsibly put one of these things on the road until it goes millions of miles without making a serious mistake. So each time you're trying to make it 10 times better, it takes another leap of engineering to be able to solve all of those next kind of peel the onion, that next layer. And so once you have the belief, it's then just false peak after false peak on the climb to the summit of something that's so safe that people just forget about it and sort of go back to reading their book after a few minutes, which is now what happens in a Waymo.
Was there ever a plateau in the capabilities of what you were doing in this situation? Was there ever a point where you said, we can get it 1,000 miles on a highway, but just driving around street corners and alleyways, we just can't do it. We're never going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole series of things where we're good at these, but we're not good at those yet. I would describe one of the ways of understanding that trajectory is, first, making it safe is super hard, but it's actually not the only problem. You have to be able to be safe and not make the person inside the car seasick, right? If you stop super fast, that might be safe, but it feels terrible to the person inside the car. Even after you solve all the safety problems and all of the, comfort for the passenger problems, there are other problems, like the body language of the car matters. When you're driving down the highway, you may not realize it, but you're reading the body language, not of the humans, but of the cars themselves. When you're going through a merge and someone's trying to get in, and you can kind of tell when they're just experimenting and when they're like, no, I'm really going, and then you have to leave room for them. That's like body language between the cars. So all these cars on the road are going to judge our cars and their body language and try to guess what we're going to do. So we have to get good at signaling with the body language of the cars so that other drivers on the road, human drivers on the road, can anticipate us in the right ways. That's a whole other universe of problems from the safety problems or the don't make your passengers carsick problem. So I'm giving you those as different examples to help you feel how maddeningly complex this problem is.
That's fascinating because when you first describe the problem, it's okay, car, camera, computer vision, connected all together. But then there's these ancillary problems that crop up on the way to the moon, basically. And those sometimes are even more nuanced and complex. I guess that's a software issue, right? So you have to figure out how to communicate given a certain situation. Like I'm in an intersection, I'm edging my way forward. How do you communicate that? Is that solved with software or is that an AI solvable problem?
Well, I mean, AI is a kind of software, but
But like human, like you figuring it out and programming your intelligence into the software.
yeah, it's more complicated than that. Obviously, you have to do things like test with humans, but you can also do things like put your cars in simulation as you've built simulations of what other humans on the road will do, and then let your car in the simulator try different behaviors and see how the simulations of humans will respond to it. I'm not saying that's the only solution, but that's a different kind of example where you can learn something. And so you can use artificial intelligence and other kinds of software to build out mechanisms so that, you know, if you're going to take a right-hand turn, you kind of drift to the right side of the lane, and makes it a little bit easier to turn right, but it also signals to people you're going to turn right. And you can discover through different ways of trying that and watching how the other cars and pedestrians around you respond, how to do that as safely as possible and communicate as effectively as possible your intentions to everybody around you.
Now, is this a big source of revenues now for Google? I don't even know how it's broken out.
They don't give out specific revenue numbers, but you can calculate at least very roughly from a few 100,000 rides per week, roughly what they're making. It's non-trivial, and compared to all that Alphabet makes, not yet massively moving the needle for Alphabet.
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It would mean so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. Being an entrepreneur is a 24/7 job. And when you're hiring, you need a partner that works as hard as you do. That hiring partner is LinkedIn Jobs. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. For one thing, you could post a job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people. You get qualified candidates. At the end of the day, the most important thing to your business is the quality of the candidates. And with LinkedIn, of course, you can feel confident that you're getting the best. Based on LinkedIn data, 72% of small and medium businesses say using LinkedIn helps them find high-quality candidates. Find out why more than 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring today. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Altucher. That's linkedin.com/Altucher to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Being an entrepreneur is a 24/7 job. And when you're hiring, you need a partner that works as hard as you do. That hiring partner is LinkedIn Jobs. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. For one thing, you could post a job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people. You get qualified candidates. At the end of the day, the most important thing to your business is the quality of the candidates. And with LinkedIn, of course, you can feel confident that you're getting the best. Based on LinkedIn data, 72% of small and medium businesses say using LinkedIn helps them find high-quality candidates. Find out why more than 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring today. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Altucher. That's linkedin.com/Altucher to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Searching for a romantic summer getaway? Escape with Rich Girl Summer, the new Audible original from Lily Chu. The exquisitely talented Philippa Soo, returning to narrate her 5th Lily Chu title. This time, Philippa is joined by her real-life husband, Stephen Pasquale. Set in Toronto's wealthy cottage country, aka the Hamptons of Canada, Rich Girl Summer follows the story of Valerie, a down-on-her-luck event planner posing as a socialite's long-lost daughter, while piecing together the secrets surrounding a mysterious family and falling deeper and deeper in love with the impossibly hard-to-read and infuriatingly handsome family assistant, Nico. Caught between pretending to belong and unexpectedly finding where she truly fits in, Valerie learns her summer is about to get far more complicated than she ever planned. She's in over her head and head over heels. Listen to Rich Girl Summer now on Audible. Go to audible.com/richgirlsummer.
The other thing I just wanted to go a little more deeply into was Google Brain, only because Google has been so impactful in the history of AI and thus the history of the world now, it turns out. And I feel like there hasn't been a lot of innovation in AI over the past 60 years or so. I mean, there was expert systems, then the basic neural nets. Then I feel Deep Blue sort of showed us, look, we can put the software, encode it right into the hardware, remove as much human intelligence as possible, and just let the hardware do the trick. And then I feel the next innovation after that, honestly, was Google Brain, this idea of reinforcement learning, these, GAN neural networks. Where do you see the moonshot in all this? And really, it's the sort of birth of modern AI.
There's a ton to say about this. I'll give you a short answer. But again, because we were super lucky, the two people who started Google Brain at X were Jeff Dean and Andrew Ng, who are both luminaries in the field. And both of them came on the first season of our podcast and did long-form interviews. And we've actually released both of the long-form interviews as videos, which your listeners can watch on YouTube now. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go listen to this. But the short of it is, at least an important part of the story is Andrew Ng had this data at Stanford, and he couldn't get anyone to pay attention to him. At the time, this is around 2010, 2011, neural nets were pretty much dead still in the space. Not entirely, but mostly. And he had this weird set of data points, which said every time you make neural networks bigger, they do better. And so he had this weird hypothesis. What if you made them way bigger? Not like 20% bigger, but like 10,000 times bigger. Like, what would happen? But that wasn't in vogue in academic artificial intelligence circles, so no one would talk to him about it. In fact, no one would even publish that data.
Why is that? Because it seems like an obvious conclusion that the bigger the better. It's a cliche.
Yeah, but neural nets had largely been discredited at that point as like not the right direction for artificial intelligence. I'm not going to defend it, but that's kind of where the field was back in 2010. Again, not entirely. There were pockets, but mostly. The other problem was no one in academia could make a neural net that was 10,000 or 100,000 times as big. That's a systems building problem that was outside the scope of what someone in a university could plausibly do. So he and Jeff Dean met and formed this thing at X to do exactly this, to industrialize neural networks and to make them enough larger that we could test out this hypothesis. Would scale really be at least an important part of the difference? And if so, how could you train and use something so much bigger than people had ever made before? And it turned out very quickly, that's what makes the difference. It's not the only trick. Later, things like transformers, which also came from Google Brain, turned out to really, again, break the field open. But Google Brain was largely started on this hypothesis of what if scale just matters more than people thought?
Yeah, and then it worked.
Yeah. And we published this now very famous article in the New York Times that basically showed that the neural network had sort of discovered cats in YouTube videos, that it was sort of having its own kind of deep dreaming, and that one of the things it found sort of the most clearly in YouTube videos, maybe not surprisingly in retrospect, was pictures of cats' faces.
That's so interesting. So it was building context while processing these videos, and one of the categories it came up with were simply cats.
Without us asking for it to learn about cats, just seeing a huge number of cat videos, it built its own cat recognizer.
I feel like you should make some kind of artwork, like the first cats AI recognized. That's like the grandfather of all contextual reasoning in AI.
Well, if your listeners want to look it up, I think this was like late 2012 maybe, New York Times, cover of the technology part of the magazine. There's a big picture of the inside of the brain of a deep net and this picture of a cat, what the abstract cat looks like.
And at the time, obviously, were Larry Page and Sergey Brin, obviously they were supportive. How supportive were they? Were they saying, this is amazing, go for it? Or what was their reactions to...
About Google Brain
in
particular? Yeah, for sure. In fact, in that particular case, it was clear relatively early on, it had only been at X for maybe 2 years, was this is going to be a big deal for Google. So it's important in this particular case that we take this technology, Google Brain, and move it back to Google and sort of let it expand there. Even though most of the things that X has done, like Waymo, the self-driving cars, like Wing, the drones for package delivery, and many of our other projects, end up being independent businesses that are either part of the Alphabet holding company umbrella or even are fully outside of Alphabet. Alphabet maintains some economic stake in them, but doesn't control them. They're sort of off doing their own thing. And that the bulk of the companies we create are actually like that. They don't mostly go back to Google.
And so in a recent podcast, you have spoken about Wing. So this is one of those things where I have thought it's impossible. Like if I order from Whole Foods, is it really what is it going to do? Is it just going to drop in my backyard like a bag of groceries, or what's going to happen?
Yeah. A very large number of people today in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a little bit in Arkansas, North Carolina, some in the UK, Australia, are having that experience you just described often enough, it doesn't even seem like a big deal to them anymore.
It just strikes me.
It's like Harry Potter owl post.
Right, exactly. Like the word that comes to mind is, this is wonderful. And I don't normally think the word wonderful. Like it's an odd word. It's like a fantasy word. And, but so what happens? So it knows your address. It knows where I am on Google Maps. And how does it, it probably knows it's not going to hit birds. It uses the kind of Waymo techniques of not hitting objects in its vicinity. So so I guess it's just, you break it into smaller pieces.
So it can sit in a parking lot, let's say, like, for example, of a Waymo or a Walmart superstore. And then you're like, oh shit, I just went shopping, but I forgot the whipping cream. I really need some for the birthday cake I'm making. And you just say whipping cream. And then someone just takes whipping cream, drops it in a box. A drone comes out of the sky from, nearby, picks up that little box, sucks it into its tummy. It zooms across the city to your house and lowers that little box that's got the whipping cream on it on a string, lets the box gently down in your backyard or on your driveway or whatever, pulls the little string back up into its tummy and flies home again. You get whipping cream in a few minutes, costs you a few dollars. You don't have to go back out to the store. It feels wonderful. It feels like magic.
And is it cost effective for the drone? Like drones are expensive to run, batteries.
Well, this is a 12-year-old project at X. Or it's not at X anymore. It was here for many years, and now it's its own independent company, like Waymo is inside the Alphabet umbrella. And we have been building it this whole time to solve that specific problem. And there's so many aspects of this where cost can show up. The cost of the drone itself, the cost of the batteries, the cost of the electricity that goes into the batteries, replacing, the drones, making sure, are there any humans that have to take care of the drones, the real estate. You have to solve each of these problems because this thing has to cost at most a few dollars in order for this to really change the world. If it was, $20 or $50, no one would spend that kind of money to get some whipping cream delivered to them. And this is most compelling when you can get anything that can fit in a bread box to you in a few minutes, almost anywhere you are. That's what would change the world. And it has to only cost a few dollars.
And when you started this project, again, I imagine the batteries must have been an impossible situation to deal with. Like they were expensive, they were weaker. Do you make a bet on on the technologies that have a Moore's law type of formula going to them? Do you make a bet that, okay, this is going to get exponentially better, so by the time we've solved these other problems, the battery problem is going to be exponentially better, so it'll be solved?
Yeah, we can't take all of the risks on every front. We have to take some responsibility for solving some of these problems. But your battery point is, we could say, look, batteries have gotten better at, 10% a year. We're not going to count on them getting better faster than that, but we're going to count on them continuing to get better in terms of the cost per, kilowatt hour, the cost per, kilowatt per gram or whatever of batteries, we could say we'll expect the trends to at least continue. That's the kind of extrapolation that we often do so that we can make sure we're skating to where the puck will be instead of trying to skate to where the puck currently is, because by the time we get there, the puck's going to be somewhere else.
Right. It's sort of like what you said earlier about you're not going to make necessarily a paradigm shift in science. So you're not going to solve first the entire problem of making batteries better. You're solving this engineering problem that uses batteries. But in some cases, you have to make a bet. Okay, batteries, like you say, are improving 10% a year. So in 5 years, when we're ready to go, this is going to come within cost.
Right. And I'll give you a really smart example that a long time ago the Wing team committed to, which is you can fly a drone with, maybe you could get away with 2, definitely by the time you get to 4 propellers, 4 motors, no problem. You can fly a drone like that. There are 12 motors with 12 propellers on our drones. But they're all hobbyist parts, which means all of the propellers and all of the motors are really cheap. And what we get from that is we have more actuation than we need, which means if 1 or 2 of the motors or propellers breaks, we're fine. And that causes safety without a lot of expense. If we had tried to make 4 propellers and 4 motors be safe enough that 2 things could break and we'd still be okay, really hard. We would have to make those motors and propellers super expensive to make sure they almost never broke. But if you have them really cheap, because you're sitting on top of all the work that's gone into the hobbyist motors and hobbyist propellers, then all of a sudden, it's actually very doable to have 12 motors and 12 propellers. And now it's super easy to stay stable, even when the winds are very high. And if, God forbid, anything goes wrong, you can still fly home, no problem. And that causes it to be very safe without having a lot of expense. So they've made a lot of really smart choices over time to be able to get that sort of safety, speed, cost trade-off into the right place.
It's so interesting. I'm really intrigued by the style of thinking, the Moonshot style of thinking. And it reminds me of a little project called, Apollo, which took people to the moon. You have this time in I forget what year, 1961 or 62, John F. Kennedy says we're going to get to the moon by the end of the decade. And everyone thought it was impossible. It was literally a moonshot. But it strikes me as a similar type of process, that there was just lots of tiny engineering problems, or big engineering problems, but lots of engineering problems that had to be fit together. And how would you describe the actual first rocket to the moon?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I take away from the Mercury and then the Apollo missions that ultimately ended in a human standing on the moon was an impossible sounding goal, but people know why we were trying to do it. And then, instead of trying to build that thing from the beginning, it was broken up into much smaller chunks. Can you get a rocket to go up and go down at all? Can you get a rocket to go up and come down after it's gone around the Earth once? Can you get the rocket to go up around the Earth once and come down with a living thing inside it, probably an animal like a dog, not a human first? Oh, that works? Okay, now can you go up, go around the Earth and come down with a human in it? And each of these steps, we actually went to the moon and went around the moon and came back without landing on it. It was very carefully thought out how to learn at each stage. And that in no way removed our aspiration from doing the whole moonshot. But there's a difference between holding on to the North Star, we're going to put a person on the moon in that case, and how can we break this up into small learning chunks so that each of them is doable, and if we're wrong about it, we have the time and the capacity to sort of change directions instead of going all in on one solution and only finding out at the end if it worked or not.
And so, like right now, someone pitching you a moonshot, what qualifies, what doesn't qualify?
So what counts as a moonshot at X is we would say it has three basic components. One, there has to be a huge problem with the world that you can describe and you want to solve. Two, there has to be some radical proposed solution, which, however unlikely it is that we can make that thing, we can all agree ahead of time, if you made that thing, it would make the huge problem go away. And then third, there has to be some kind of breakthrough technology that you can propose that gives us at least a glimmer of a hope of making that radical proposed solution, that science fiction sounding product or service, which would then make that huge problem go away. Once you have those three things, we have a moonshot story hypothesis. That doesn't mean you're right or that we win, but at least we have a testable hypothesis and we can go bang on it to see if it's either a little bit less crazy than we thought or a little bit more crazy than we thought. If it's more crazy than we thought, we should put it to rest and go find something else to do. And if it's a little less crazy than we thought, then we can double down on it.
What was the big break in science that was involved in Waymo?
Well, I mean, DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency for the United States, had these grand challenges. This had nothing to do with X. This was before X was even started, where they challenged the academic community to make self-driving cars that could go 150 miles in the desert out in the Mojave somewhere. Nobody succeeded in driving 150 miles autonomously in the first contest. That was in 2005, I think. Then in 2007, 3 teams actually succeeded. It was a mess and, it was very dusty and there was nothing to hit out there because it's in the middle of the desert. But 3 teams succeeded. And so that was one of our inspirations in late 2009, which was, what if we set up a Manhattan Project and we invite some of the leaders from each of those projects to all come together and see if we can make self-driving cars? That's half of the answer to your question. But then once they got to X, we created a 1,000-mile challenge, which we broke up into 10 100-mile routes. And we said, we want to see you drive each of these 100-mile routes in California at least once with nobody touching the steering wheel or the brake pedal or the gas pedal. You can try as many times as you want, but you have to do each of them at least once fully autonomously. If they hadn't been able to do that, we would have probably canceled the project. Took them about a year, but they did actually do all 10 of those 100-mile routes. They were hard routes. And by the time they had done those, we went, wow, okay, I didn't think that was necessarily possible. Super cool they did that. Let's double down on this team.
But what was the science breakthrough? So from the earlier test, we know they can go 150 miles per hour. So hypothetically, they could probably go 1,000 miles.
Yeah, I mean, I would say these things that predated X, the second DARPA Grand Challenge, the one where 3 of the cars actually managed to complete the 150-mile run, all 3 of them had one thing in common, which is that they combined, that they all had computers on board, they all had cameras on board, they all had radar and LiDAR on board, and they combined these different kinds of sensing techniques from cameras and LiDAR and radar and mix them together in a useful way, which helped the computers reason about what was around them better than they could have with any one of those sensors. And so that's part of what inspired us, and it's why to this day, Waymo has LiDAR and radar and cameras on all of its cars.
So the breakthrough really is like an engineering breakthrough. The idea that if we can combine these things effectively, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 situation.
Yeah, exactly. Not to minimize all the software that had to happen afterwards.
And so, because the software has to coordinate between all this hardware in the right way. And the same thing with AI. It's like there's this insight that, okay, if we make it 10,000 times bigger, then we're going to achieve something we couldn't realize possible. And theoretically, this is possible, just nobody's done it yet.
Yeah. And I mean, Waymo made some very smart choices along the way. Like, for example, as I was referencing before, they built the best simulator in the world. Not only did they have the maps, like where are all the roads? That's the easy part. Or what is our car? And if we steer left or steer right, what will happen to our car? That's also the easy part. They built a simulator that accurately predicts what everyone else will do if we steer left or we steer right. And by building that simulator over and over again, every time they would go out and drive, they would have an expectation. Oh, you see that car 100 yards away? If we steer a little bit right, what does that car do? We guess it's going to veer a little bit right with us. It didn't? Oh, we need to update our simulator. And what's happened is Waymo's driven, 10 million miles or something like that in the real world, either fully autonomously or autonomously with someone holding their hand by the wheel. But they've driven billions and billions of miles in the simulator. But that simulator is now so accurate because of how tight they got the simulator to be with the real world that they can actually learn a lot from driving and practicing in the simulator. That's an example of an investment they made more than 10 years ago that they continue to be at the sort of head of the self-driving car group because they're so safe, and they're so safe because they have that simulator, or partly because they have the simulator.
Given this intense knowledge that it has, let's say all the cars on the road were only Waymo cars, like all the cars on the planet were Waymo cars. Theoretically, how fast could all the cars be moving at mostly the same time?
I mean, the roads are mostly built for human drivers, so it very much depends on the roads you're talking about. I think, cars could go 20 or 30% faster on most roads than they currently do very safely. I doubt they could go double the speed. But there's a bunch of other interesting things would happen. I mean, for starters, 1 million people a year die in car accidents because of human error. It would be nice for that 1 million people a year not to die. But there are other things like 8% of the highway is taken up with actual cars when it looks like it's jam-packed, because we need a lot of space between cars for stopping distance. So if you had only self-driving cars on the road, you could fit at least double the number of cars on the freeway while going at speed because their reaction times are much better than ours. So they need a lot less of a gap between cars in order to still be safe, because they never look away to look at their phone or something. So if you could pack twice as many cars onto the road, even if they're not moving twice as fast per se, there'll be a lot less traffic, a lot fewer slowdowns, and that means you probably would get to your destination a lot faster.
That's really interesting. 8%, only 8% of the roads on jam-packed roads, you're saying, are occupied by cars.
Even when they're like in stop and go traffic, it's less than that because everyone's basically parked next to each other. But when you're moving at basically full speed, but it feels like the roads are pretty jammed together, about 8% of the road is taken up with the actual cars. And the rest is all the gaps that you need for stopping distance.
Sort of like how people describe atoms. Like they seem like they're all really close and packed together, but actually it's the equivalent of almost millions of miles apart, the electrons from the neutrons and so on. Tell me about Tapestry, the moonshot for the electric grid.
Sure. So when we started Tapestry, we wanted the same thing that everyone else has wanted for a long time. Wouldn't it be nice if we could make a set of software services that helped grid operators around the world, 1, manage the grid that they currently have, 2, plan for the grid of the future, which would help them a lot. And then 3, help them optimize their grids in real time to help the grids of the world become what they really want to be when they grow up, which is basically marketplaces for electrons. All of that is totally impossible for the simple reason that you can't build any of those services I just described if you don't actually have a circuit diagram of the grid you want to help. And if you go to any grid operator in the world, these are good companies full of really good, smart people. I am not knocking them. But they do not have a map of their own grid. The grid is the most expensive thing humanity's ever built. It's the largest thing humanity's ever built. It's the most complex thing humanity's ever built. And it's been cobbled together over 120 years. Nobody has any idea. If you ask, show me where every wire is, where every transformer is, where every inverter is on your grid, like nobody has that map. So Tapestry, once we realized that, took a big pause and spent about 5 years making it so we could take whatever data the grid operators did have and information from Street View cars, from drones, from satellites, and lots of other data sources, and then use induction and deduction, like a detective story, figure out what the underlying actual circuit diagram of the grid was for, let's say, the country of Chile. Once we've done that, then we can start to offer them services like how to manage their grid, how to plan for the future of their grid, how to optimize their grid. And this has profound effects. Let me use an example your listeners are probably familiar with. You've probably heard that there are long wait times, that if you have a solar field or wind farm, or you've made a data center and you want to plug it into the grid, you have to get at the end of a line. In the United States, it's, depending on what part of the United States you're in, about 6 to 10 years. And that's not abnormal. That's basically the same in Chile or South Africa or the UK. This is called the interconnection queue. Why would it take 10 years? Why would you have to wait 10 years? The problem is, if somebody has a solar field and they want to plug it onto the grid, some people at the grid operator have to spend a lot of time thinking about what could possibly go wrong here. Let's say a lot of electrons are coming from this and very weird other circumstances. Can we imagine any circumstances where this would cause the grid to stop working and cause a big blackout, or worse, cause a fire or something? And if we can find any of those, then we tell you, no, you can't plug your solar field onto the grid. If we think about it for a month and we decide you're safe and we give you the thumbs up, 3 or 4 solar fields have gone on the back of the line while we're busy giving you a yes. That's how it's a 10-year wait time. So what we've done, one of the things that Tapestry has done, is automate the process I just described of running thousands and thousands of scenarios and helping the grid operators they work with to verify that the thing at the front of the interconnect queue can be approved, or can't, in a day instead of a month. And that means that instead of those queues getting longer and longer, they're starting to get shorter and shorter once they work with Tapestry.
And so this is in use now.
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned the government of Chile because they're the first country that announced that they're now using Tapestry for all of their future planning of their grid because they've been testing it and using it for a few years. And so they've now sort of formalized that process.
And the process of building kind of a map of the grid, is that grid dependent, or can you just throw it at a grid and it makes the map?
Somewhere in between. I know we just went to Oregon and it took a couple weeks, and we already had a better map after a few weeks than the grid operator there had. But I also don't think it was good enough after a few weeks that we could be helping them already. Let's call it a couple months and getting shorter is, I think, and it would very much depends on the size of the grid. So we just announced earlier this year that we're helping the largest grid by dollars in the world, which is called PJM. This is the eastern seaboard of the United States. I think Atlanta might be part of it. I'm not sure, but it's at least the 13 kind of original colonies for the United States, roughly. Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, those, we're now helping them in a very similar kind of way. But this is a lot of wires, a lot of money, a lot of complexity. So that is not a 3-month project. That's a much, much bigger project.
You know, another thing that has come out of X, and you talk about this on the podcast, is Google Glass, which is kind of the dream for someone like me to basically be on the internet all the time through my glasses. But I remember having Google Glasses when it first came out, and it wasn't quite everything I had hoped for, although I assumed it would get better. Although I have not tried since to do any kind of augmented reality glasses.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm really proud that we started. And I think it turns out we were right. The world has come around to augmented reality glasses in a big way very recently. Part of our job at X is to be the right amount too early. But part of the occupational hazard of trying to be the right amount too early is sometimes you're too early. So that was part of our miss with Google Glass. But we also had another, I think, substantial miss, which was we built one of the best learning platforms ever made. I'm incredibly proud of the quality of the learning platform, and it sounds like you got to experience it. And to the extent that you were experiencing it as a learning platform, I bet you loved it.
Yeah.
But to the extent that we were letting you feel or build expectations around it being a product when it wasn't a product, we didn't even know what it was for yet, then as a product, it probably didn't live up to your expectations because it wasn't a product. And I think we really did a bad job, especially over time. There were enough people who were buying it and trying to treat it like a product, and we sort of fell into the habit of not just allowing them, but encouraging that. And that, I think we really lost the plot there. We should have really stuck to, no, this is not a product, this is a learning platform. We actually called the early customers of this thing the explorers because we wanted to highlight the learning platform aspect of it rather than trying to let it be seen as a product. But over time, because we let it be seen more as a product, it started disappointing people. And I think that was an important learning lesson for us.
And so what's next there? Like, when am I going to have augmented reality in my daily life? When everybody's going to have it?
I mean, depending on how badly you want it and which company you want to buy it from, in the next year or two, you can already start to have that experience. Google has already announced, I'm not sure they're going to use Google Glass as the brand. They might. But they're building hardware that they're designing, but Samsung is building that has a screen built into the lenses, and then it's called Project Astra, not to be confused with Astro. This is Astra, if people want to look it up. But it's artificial intelligence built into the glasses that will look out through a camera and then be able to talk to you about what it's seeing in your field of view so that you can say, oh, what's that restaurant over there? And it will answer the question in a very sort of normal way. So you can now have a conversation with your augmented reality device in a way that 12 years ago, the technology just wasn't quite ready for.
And when you say conversation, will it show me something on the screen or will it say something in my ear?
It has, well, it can talk into your ear, but it also has a screen that looks like a big screen TV floating in space about, 10 feet away from you in front of one of your two eyes. And it's, a little bit distracting till you get used to it. And then it's kind of profoundly cool.
Do you think, will there be an app store for it? So other AI developers or developers who are familiar with the technology will be able to develop their own tools?
I'm sure they will. I'm not sure it's been announced yet, but I can't imagine otherwise. I remember for Google Glass in the early days, we were constantly prototyping things, like for people who were deaf, just being able to get a transcript of what was being said. It was so cool.
That's a great idea.
Being able to let filmmakers use it as a very different filming platform to try to capture sort of cinema verite. For people giving speeches, they could have their speech roll by in Google Glass so that they didn't need a teleprompter. There were just hundreds of things we built by ourselves. So I must imagine there will be tens of thousands of cool applications that the world will come up with.
I mean, the world is changing so fast. Well, obviously, so let me ask you, have you guys explored the biggest moonshot of all, which is longevity and anti-aging?
We haven't. I'm going to double check about that. We haven't, but partly because there's a other bet at Alphabet, an owned subsidiary that's like another little sister to Google called Calico that is already said, this is the problem we're going to go try to solve. So to some extent, we've left them to it. Also, Verily, the life science business for Alphabet, that's another thing that came from X. So having started up a set of healthcare things that then graduated together to become Verily, it just felt like between Calico and Verily, we should probably leave anti-aging to them. But we just announced and talked about this on our podcast too. We just shut down, sadly, a nuclear fusion thing that we worked on for a number of years. We've had stuff in the quantum space. We're not shy. We're working on some pretty interesting things here.
Yeah, Google has been a leader in kind of developments in quantum computing. Is that out of X?
Well, so there's several different things. There's the actual underlying hardware of entangling these particles and making the qubits. That has nothing to do with X. You're right. Google is one of the leaders in that space, arguably the leader in that space, but that's not X. X separately had a set of people who were more on how to program quantum computers, what to do with quantum computers. They were also exploring some next generation issues around quantum sensing, quantum networking, which I can describe if you want. That then, as a bucket, we gathered up and spun out into a business that's now called Sandbox AQ.
Okay, yeah, I'm game. What is quantum networking? Let me try to is it when one particle is entangled, you instantly have information, a billion miles away, and so it's networking in that sense?
Sure, that's an example of quantum networking. Is if I have a particle and it decays into two particles, then those particles have a superposition of spins, but you know ahead of time that their spins have to be opposite because there has to be a conservation of momentum. If one's spinning this way, then the other one has to be spinning the other way so that they kind of cancel each other out. But each one is, in a certain sense, spinning in all ways at once until you look at them. So you let them shoot off in opposite directions. They could then be hundreds of miles away from each other. And if you ask one, which way are you spinning? Then you collapse the universe. You're now not in the multiverse anymore. You've decided which universe you're in for that particle. And that forces the other particle instantaneously to be in the opposite spin state. So even though you're not talking across those hundreds of miles, you know what is true about the universe hundreds of miles away. It's called a one-time pad. But here's an example of quantum sensing. The bad news is that these quantum particles, when you're trying to get a quantum sensor to be in a certain state, it can get messed up really easily by the outside world. All kinds of things happening in the outside world can do the equivalent of studying it or ask it what state it's in, and then it collapses. The superposition of state goes away. But you can see that as a feature instead of a bug and turn it into a sensor. So if it's really sensitive to something, you can use it to sense that thing. So for example, if your quantum particle, if your quantum qubit that you were trying to make can get messed up by very small changes in electromagnetic flux, well, call it a sensor for electromagnetic flux, and what was a bug has just become a feature. That's an example on the sensing side.
And so what do you think is the potential here? Is there going to be, in any time soon, a 1 million qubit computer that could break the passwords of Bitcoin, for instance, which is what everyone's worried about?
I mean, I think well, first of all, there's qubits, the 1 bit equivalent for a quantum computer. And then there's a error-corrected qubit. Because these things are so prone to errors by how they work, how you program them, you need kind of roughly 100 of them to equal 1 qubit that you can treat essentially as having no errors in it. So by the time we're at 1 million error-corrected qubits, so like maybe 100 million qubits total, yeah, for sure, we will be able to break current cryptography. There are plans for doing post-quantum cryptography, ways of encoding information that quantum computers can't break. But the way you send information to your bank today, the way blockchain works today, quantum computers are going to be able to unravel all of that very quickly once they get there. Now, reasonable people can disagree, but the most optimistic say that's going to happen in 5 years. The most pessimistic say it'll happen in 20. Even 20 years is not that long from now for secrecy to kind of get broken.
Yeah.
The world's going to change a lot.
Because the problem is, it's already too late in some sense, because someone can simply take a snapshot of your bank's network right now or the blockchain right now, and then let's say 20 years from now, they'll be able to see every transaction I did today, which might not be a good thing.
Yes. So store now, decrypt later is definitely happening. At least countries, probably companies around the world are doing this. So you're not wrong to be a little bit worried about that. It's possible that the blockchain will have moved to some post-quantum cryptography setup so that you don't lose your Bitcoins, but it still won't solve the fact that anyone who's been listening on the internet will be able to find out every bank transaction you did, every thing about your health records. That is a worry that people have.
Yeah, I mean, and it's already done in the sense that there's no, unless you destroy all the data right now, which is impossible, it's going to happen.
Yes, I mean, 5 to 20 years, not overnight, but I believe some of that is very likely to happen, yes.
And it's almost like Q Day or something. Q Day will arrive. It's going to be a before and after in the world after that. Do you think it'll be that dramatic a change?
Humanity's pretty adaptable, so I'm sure it will, A, not be instantaneous. It will take a little while. And B, we'll move on. The truth is people say that they're really wound up about privacy, and then most people will trade their social security number for a free baseball hat if you just run the experiment. I mean, look, I'm not trivializing security. I think it's very important, and I think the world will move on.
Yeah, no, I guess I agree. And then I ask about these things because, again, you deal in these futuristic possibilities in all of these moonshots and all of your work. So a lot of people have opinions, but you've thought many hours about many of these issues. Take AI as an example. Everyone says this might be the one technological, and I say everybody, but I'm simplifying. People say AI might be the one technological revolution where old jobs are not replaced by the new jobs in the new industry, because here you're going to have computers replacing the human jobs. Do you think, I personally don't really think that's true, but I don't have real reasoning behind it. Do you think there will be fewer jobs in the future because of AI, or that AI will create industries with new jobs and that will be enough?
I think what gets lost in these conversations is partly empathy for which jobs. There is lots of evidence that in this wave, as in previous waves of technology improvement, more jobs will be created than lost, and that it will require new skills in order to be part of those new jobs. And some people, for a variety of reasons, won't be able to retool for those new jobs. It can both be true that there will be more jobs afterwards than before, and that some people will get left behind in the process. And that's a social problem that we really have to deal with. Having empathy, concern, and focus on that issue is not a rejection of artificial intelligence or rejection of the future. It's in fact to support a future that's best for everybody. We need to make sure that there isn't concentrated harm, because it is rational for the people who are going to experience the concentrated harm to fight like hell to slow the future up, which isn't really good for any of us. But we have to start with some empathy for them if we want the future to be great for all of us and not just for most of us.
Astro Teller, once again, first time in 10 years you've been on the podcast, and a few years before that, I had met you in your Moonshot labs myself, and always such a pleasure to talk to you. I always learn so much, and you're really one of the smartest people on the planet that I know. So thank you once again for coming on the show, and everyone should really listen to your podcast, the Moonshot Podcast. Where's the easiest place for people to get it? I listened on YouTube Music, actually.
Yeah, YouTube Music is great. And if you just search for Moonshot Factory, Moonshot Podcast, you can learn through our whole first season and the second season that's about to start in a few months a lot more about the things we talked about today. James, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on your awesome show.
No problem. Thank you, Astro. See you next time. Hopefully not in a decade.
All right.
Just when you thought summer couldn't get any hotter, Pluto TV is turning up the heat with thousands of free movies. Presenting Summer of Cinema. Stream your favorite blockbuster films like Gladiator,
I will have my vengeance.
Good Burger,
This is what I call fast food.
Beverly Hills Cop, The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, and Julie and Julia.
Bon appetit!
All for free on your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
In the time it takes you to actually board a flight from Group 8,
now boarding Premier Altitude Elite Club members.
you could have bought a Hyundai on Amazon. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details. Limited availability, pickup through participating Hyundai dealer in select markets.